Hey everyone, I'm really excited to host today. This is our session on the power of service, building thriving communities. Welcome to Points of Light. And my name is Vanessa Diamond. I am the EVP of Global Networks and Nonprofit Programs. We are really excited to have these sessions that are leading into our conference, which is coming up June 3rd through 6th in New Orleans. It's an annual conference that we host that brings about 1,400 individuals from the nonprofit, corporate, government, civic sections that really are focused on learning, networking, and inspiration. It is the place to be if you are interested in volunteerism and service. It is the conversations and the things that you learn at this conference will bring you into the full year of being able to take action in your work. So today's webinar is the power of service, building thriving communities. It's the last one of this series. And we're really hosting these both to give you opportunities to learn now and in the future. But this one in particular is focused on the idea of uncertainty, of friction, of best practices, and how we can think about our mission-driven work and ground ourselves in the values and the practices that keep our work and our intention focused and in the forefront. Today, we're going to talk about how that friction is essential to innovation, how data and research can drive strategy, and how best practices that we all know exist and best in class can move our collective work forward. I am really excited to introduce our three speakers. They are going to come on screen right now and introduce themselves. So let's pop them on the screen. Dave, since you popped up first, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dave Smith. I'm the CEO of the California Volunteers Fund and excited to be part of this conversation today.
Laura.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Rugg. I'm the Chief Service Officer with the City of New York. I also am a former Points of Light and employee about 10 years ago with the Youth Division Generation On. So very excited to be here with you all today.
And last but not least.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tommi Laitio. I am a California-based consultant working with libraries, parks, and city leaders on friction, but here today because of my research as a Bloomberg Public Innovation Fellow at Johns Hopkins on friction and partnerships.
So we are going to keep with you, Tommi, and you're going to give us a short presentation so we can learn a little bit about your concepts around friction and what it can mean for creative action.
That sounds great. Super excited to share this work with everyone and happy to be here. So I will maybe start with something that might seem obvious. I think all of us on this call know that you can create good cities only by government action. You're probably here because you believe in the power of service and the power of collaboration and partnerships. But we also can create good cities only by things outside government. We need functioning local government to be able to create good cities. And that's kind of the research I've been doing. How do we create partnerships and how do we deal with the fact that if we are genuinely serious about partnerships, we're probably working with organizations that are very different than us and have different priorities and different resources and powers. So my background before the fellowship at Johns Hopkins University was in the city of Helsinki in Finland, which is the capital of the happiest country in the world. I had the role that the mayor often called the director of fun. So I was in charge of arts and culture, sports, public libraries, and youth. We were delivering around 20 million experiences for residents and being the main grant maker for nonprofits in the city. And we knew on a daily basis that we can't do this work alone. Like we needed to work with our local partners, our arts organizations, youth organizations, sports organizations to create a thriving city and create, in a way, reasons for people to open their front door and join public life. And I was really keen in that role to understand, like, how can we as a city be a good partner, meet the city's goals, while also being a trustworthy and predictable partner to our nonprofits, local businesses, and philanthropy. So in 2022, I got this incredible opportunity for 2 years, a huge privilege to serve as the inaugural Bloomberg Public Innovation Fellow at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore in Maryland. It's a fellowship for public sector leaders to come into an academic environment and do research on the future of public services and public innovation. And I wanted to dive deeper into this question of how do we actually work with partners? What are the skills and practices that local governments need to be good partners, to get innovative partnerships, do innovation, so basically new things, new great things in cities, but also sustain or even build legitimacy, which is a fancy word for public trust. So how do we balance doing new things and building public trust? And I looked at this in 5 metropolitan regions in 3 countries, and especially focused on public space partnerships. That's my own background, but also an area of public policy where, residents love public spaces like libraries and parks. They are usually underfunded, and there's a long history of partnerships. And so I thought that was like a very fruitful place to look at this work. So 3 cities in North America, then 1 city in Brazil, and then Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And I just wanted to give you kind of a glimpse of what I focused on and what kind of cases that I looked at in terms of partnerships. And I wanted to share an example from outside the US and from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So the city of Amsterdam and the Amsterdam Public Library was developing this, what they called the Library of the Future. The city council had decided to do a $40 million investment into a multicultural, historically underserved borough 20 minutes from the city center. And I was really keen on understanding how does the library build this library concept in this area where there's quite a lot of history of over-promising and under-delivering from city government. So when the library started working on this project, they actually faced a lot of friction, resistance, and skepticism. And I was really taken back and really in awe of the way that the library team kind of understood that it's not personal. It has to do with the institutional legacy that you have as a public authority going into this neighborhood. And they really focused on listening and talking openly about, in a way, you might not trust us that much. And what they learned through listening was this huge concern around less about innovation and library of the future and more about youth. And they decided to focus this project really on youth. And they understood that trust is not built or friction is not dealt with by only talking about it, but it's really, in a way, built through concrete action. So they demonstrated that they heard what people were saying, the priorities that people are raising through concrete action and actually sharing power with their local partners. So they built these pop-up labs for the library. They rented storefronts and sea containers and invited young people and local nonprofits to experiment new library services like podcast studios with local partners, inviting young people to have work experience and try things out. They brought in this digital academy called Tommi, which is a global network of centers for young people around creativity and digitalization. It's a world-class institution that they bring into this neighborhood. They are able to bring, in a way, new philanthropic funding and corporate funding into this neighborhood and demonstrating that we've heard your concern around young people and we're bringing you world-class services. And then finally, what they're doing is that the library is supposed to open in 2030. But what they decided to do is that they already now in September are opening a wooden pavilion next to the future location of the library and co-governing that wooden pavilion with a local community organization and the Digital Academy, demonstrating that we are still developing this concept, we are sharing power with you, and in a way, all of this resulted as this project moving forward, and young people from this neighborhood showing up at city council saying, we want this library. I think it's a really wonderful example of how you can embrace friction and be very practical about it. So my research in the paper that's been published by Johns Hopkins University, my argument is saying that friction is inevitable if you work with organizations that are different from you. From an innovation standpoint, friction is desirable. It's really beneficial for new ideas and legitimacy. But I think it's worth saying that it's often really frustrating, especially for public servants who are focused on getting things done. It's sometimes really frustrating to deal with friction. And my approach in the research is to approach friction not as a mindset issue, not tell in a way, overworked public servants or nonprofits to just get over it, but really look at it as a question of skills and capabilities. Like, what are the things that we can resource, train, turn into public policy? Make it very practical, while understanding that it's inevitable if you're committed really to equity and working with partners. So in my research, I identified 4 capabilities based on these 5 case studies, which are about to come out. And they're quite simple. The first one I call navigation, and it really focuses on local government staff. Preparing your staff to deal with friction, understanding that you always bring institutional legacy into conversations, good and bad institutional legacy, and creating support mechanisms for your staff when they've gone into like heated arguments or heated conversations with partners. The second one is what I call convening. So here, my argument is that when you start building something new with partners, you should actually start from a place of difference rather than from a place of similarity. Validate differences first, validate experiences first before moving into searching shared ground. And this is where facilitation and brokers like community foundations play a huge role. Experimentation is the third one, where the goal of experimentation is not to be successful, but to get evidence and confidence. And then finally, codification. You have to turn your partnership principles into public policy so that you can be held accountable and you're a predictable partner for your partners. I'm really excited to discuss this work and learn from my colleagues on the call. My basic argument is saying that if you have no friction in your partnership, you probably don't have all the right people in the room, or they're not being honest with you. But looking forward to discussing this further, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share. And I think I'll pass it over now to Laura to share her work from New York. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tommi. And I'm just going to share my screen quickly and get this started. And just as I said, I'm so thrilled to be here with everyone. And I've been at NYC Service 10 years overall and 4 years in this role as Chief Service Officer. So I was a bit kind of homegrown in the culture of NYC Service. And when I came in, so much of the work that we've been doing in the vision of our office, in the last few years especially, has been to bring service and volunteerism into focus as a municipal strategy. I've been very interested in the work that Points of Light is doing, right now, and kind of being shepherds for this message that service isn't just a nice thing to do, it's very necessary. And here in New York, we really see service as the bedrock of how communities come together. It's how they take care of each other, no matter what is going on around in the city, the country, the world around them. It's how residents come together to help each other to thrive. And it's really the ways in which people come together to give agency. So we really come, and I think for me, my personal belief is just at my core is that people belong in government. So people belong in helping to shape our strategies, helping to give information as we, not only our office, but all city agencies, develop our work, develop our programming to make it very responsive to the people who are in our city. We started in 2017 kind of thinking very deeply about this with a survey called our New York City Civic Engagement plan. And this is a survey where I think Beth is going to post it in the chat. And then also it's something that we have available on our site to read. But we actually went out and went door to door and conducted a volunteer survey. And it really helped to bring in a wider view of how people are engaging, where they're engaging, and was just something that was a catalyst in our thinking about how we can be more inclusive in terms of thinking about a wider vision of what is volunteering and how does volunteering come into play in cities to really help build effective resources. So what we're going to do today, or what I'm going to talk through for a few minutes, is just looking at where our strategy has come from, a couple key things that we've done, and then you all are getting a very special preview. We've just done a brand new updated survey to really look at some core things here in New York City. So we'll be formally releasing it for the conference in June, and we'll have it as a part of our formal presentation. But just taking a couple steps back, we really look at our strategic plan, the necessity for service right now. And we've centered those into really 4 key areas. Number one, that there's a loneliness crisis that the Surgeon General, the former Surgeon General, and many people are talking about right now, from the pandemic, from other, things such as the rise of social media. Also looking at the need for nonprofit capacity, and just because of the pandemic, the shortage of volunteers that was happening here in New York City and across the country. The third piece is really looking at bridging polarization, that this is just a time of distrust. How do we figure out ways for people to come together, as Tommi talked about, just having really rich conversations, really in-depth conversations and real conversations with each other in a manner of respect. And then finally, looking at service as a strategy for equity and justice, and how we actually bring in service as a technique to really provide services, to provide resources to communities. So the way, those are kind of the 4 conditions that we look at that are really the reason of why our office exists in this moment and what we're looking to focus on. Our strategy is that every team in our office really goes under three strategies and addresses them. Number one, access. So how do we just give people access to opportunities to serve and to get involved in volunteerism? That looks very different in our different programs, from AmeriCorps to our city agency work, to the work that we do with nonprofits. We also do a lot of work direct to individuals to get them to engage, but really that everybody, all 8.5 million New Yorkers, should have an easy way to access service and get involved. The second piece is knowledge. Knowledge is really key. And again, it's coming back to this idea of how do we build a community and a service community that understands the depths of service. And that's what really brings us to the third one on bridging. So because we're the city of New York, we have a lot of power, and a lot of our value is that we look at a 10,000-foot view. We're working across the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector. We're working directly with people. So we have a lot of power in convening and bringing people together and bridging people with each other. So what we've done, so that's kind of the necessity for it, the strategy of how we approach our work. And then we look really deeply in our programming. So about half of our office works on national service, our AmeriCorps programs, and, really works to get New Yorkers engaged there. We also have a community engagement team. So that really focuses heavily on the nonprofit sector. We also have a team that works on city agencies. So for both nonprofits and city agencies, we work with them to support them to either build or strengthen their volunteer programming. We do that through training, funding, and a lot of different avenues. And then finally, we have our private sector with our public-private partnerships team. And that's really a lot of our focus right now has been on how do we bring the business sector in, and that's been a priority of the Adams administration, bringing the private sector in to be solutions focused with everyone in the city. So how do we bring in businesses to help us look at the issues in the city, come up with creative solutions, and then leverage, again, that knowledge and expertise in the private sector to benefit New York. And finally, direct to residents, we have a pretty robust website where we have several hundred nonprofits at any given time have opportunities up on our site. And we get about 10,000 people a month who are coming in and looking to connect for ways to serve. So we also do a lot of outreach through our social media platforms, newsletters, to communicate all of this. And I think where we are, and I think bringing into the conversation today especially, we have a lot of really great program level data that we know a lot of things about how individuals succeed, how our programming impacts people within our programs. What we're looking to bridge over the next couple of years and through our strategic plan is to more directly position, going back to the necessity of service. So in all the work we do, what is the necessity for service right now? And how do we really position that, like why service is a solution right now? So 2 of the things, I'm just going to quickly talk about our advisory council and then get a little bit more into the data for a minute. so much, our office is part of a larger Office of Civic Engagement here in New York City. So we have 3 sister agencies that work alongside with us. And then our focus is specifically on volunteerism and service, where others focus on things like voting, participatory budgeting, going out into the community and talking to residents. So what we are looking to do is, how do we actually bring the voice of the community into our work and help impact our work? 2 things that we've done in this last year. Number one, we formed an advisory council that just wrapped up. So this was a 12-month kind of sprint group that helped us. We had partners that were from private companies here in the city, nonprofits, the public sector, so we had city agency partners, and then also a lot of our national service partners. So we had a group of 15 people, and we really worked to answer the question of, how can we make New York the best and easiest place to volunteer? So much of what they talked about, we've announced 4 recommendations, ranging from things like looking at website improvements and accessibility for people to be able to engage easier, to revamping our trainings and definitions of service. So we'll have working groups and advisory groups that will kind of help us think through that in the next 18 to 24 months. And then the last 2 is that people really were looking for things like, we're going to launch a new campaign, a citywide campaign that will start in the fall, as well as use a summit every fall in October to bring all of our cross-sector partners together. A huge thing that we learned out of this is that people want to be connected. They want to feel like they're a part of something bigger. All of our partners that represented people who've been working in CSR, volunteer management for many years, that they're really looking in this moment to kind of build these collectives that are going to help sustain them and build these relationships in ways that we can all come together here in New York. And then the second thing I'll talk about quickly is just building outcome data. So for us, it's looking at, again, we know where our programs work very well. We've got great data to make the individual programming decisions, but how do we look at how this information is coming back? So we just completed a survey that will be released in June. We had about just over 8,100 New York City residents who participated and represented New York City. We worked with a company called Zen City who helped us administer the survey, where we targeted people like ads on various social platforms as well as online service panels, and really looked to, through the quotas from the US Census to match the distribution of race, ethnicity, age, and gender here in New York City. So it's pretty well normed to represent the population of New York City. A couple key things as I go into the results. Number one, we didn't ask about informal volunteerism. So all of these results are really based on people who have volunteered on behalf of an organization. And then the final thing is that when we release this, we also will be putting the data in aggregate form on New York City Open Data, which is a platform here in New York City where anybody can go in and access kind of this key and important data across New York City. So for those of you who are big data wonks, we will have the actual data available in addition to the report. And so just quickly, we kind of had key insights and then had impact findings that went back to those 4 conditions of right now that we're looking at. I'll just quickly, the first couple bullets here. Number one, half of the respondents either currently volunteered or volunteered in the last year, which to us, every time we go out and we do these individual surveys, we're oftentimes seeing that more people are being engaged, or more people are engaging that are actually being reported in other studies. It was very much local to like the people were volunteering in the boroughs that they lived in. So that's something that's key here in New York City. It's a huge city, and there's huge geographies and like different, being in the Bronx is very different than being in Staten Island or Queens or Brooklyn or Manhattan, so that people are really looking very locally and in their local communities. And that volunteering in general was just very high across all racial and ethnic groups as well here in the city. So I think one of the conclusions that we were coming away with is that it's really important for us to help connect people to opportunities where they're living and working in places that are close to them. And then I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anybody on this call that the most frequent barrier and consistent barrier was just a lack of time. So I'm not really going to go into that too much, but scheduling conflicts, again, all of that just kind of leads back to people are really needing opportunities to serve where they live and where they work. And then the last couple we thought were quite interesting, that looking at healing and connection, half of the survey respondents reported who had volunteered were with people with different political views. So more than half of the respondents were volunteering with people who are different from them. And then 78% of the people who are volunteering were able to build positive, trusting relationships with those of different political views. So I think we just really see that in an age of polarization, volunteering is very much an act that helps kind of diverse city residents build bonds, build connections, and come together over things that they care about and share that. And then finally, and this one is a little bit of a nuance. It's interesting because when we asked people, why are they, how do they want to address systemic issues? Across the board, many people said or indicated things like, voting, participatory budgeting is big here in here in New York City. But the people who had volunteered actually were ranked number one, that service and volunteerism was the way that they saw themselves enacting kind of or working on systemic issues here in New York. So really it's the idea that once people volunteer, they see it as a form of how they can look at systemic issues in their community. It's how they really see in depth what they can do and the agency that they have to do that. And so the second piece that we touch on the report are the impact findings. These are actually, these are kind of similar to what I've just talked about, but these go in relation back to those 4 core kind of criteria of what we're looking at now here in New York City and why it's such a big reason to include service. So I think number one, volunteering can be a powerful tool in healing the loneliness epidemic. 65% of survey respondents said that they found connection and that when they volunteered, they gained the connection that they desired. The second one, just looking at that really, again, going back to this capacity issue and helping nonprofits build capacity, we saw that people are volunteering. There's a very healthy number of people volunteering. But what it may be is just that there's a lack of local opportunities for them to get engaged with. So I think looking at volunteers, almost 2/3 of the volunteers, they're community driven, they're diverse, they're as willing or more willing to volunteer since the pandemic. And then 74% of them were volunteering locally. So again, it's really getting back to this idea of people want to volunteer where they are and in the issues that they see around them in their communities. And then finally, the third and fourth, looking at volunteerism, again, being a powerful connector. I just talked about this a little bit, but that people really tend to be more likely to build trusting relationships with people with different views through volunteering. And that's something that we saw again and again, and we really believe that trust in others is able to establish cooperative connections, sustain civic actions, and people wanting to continue to engage with each other. And then finally, exposure to volunteerism and service, again, going back to this idea that when people participate in service, it allows them to see it as a critical support and an action towards a larger goal. So we really think that when New Yorkers volunteer, they believe that they're contributing to equity and justice. And just truly the highest number of people when we asked where they were volunteering, they're volunteering in people-centered activities. So it's things like hunger and poverty, homelessness, youth mentoring, tutoring, looking at health and wellness. So really, just believing this idea that volunteering is evolving, our vision is to build a culture of service, and that volunteering is building into a more conscious, justice-oriented form of civic engagement. And that's really what we're trying to do. So I think just, in ending and kind of going back into the conversation with everyone, we're really just looking at this idea that the power of service to bridge people and solutions, that it's not just a nice thing, it's a necessary thing. It's something that here in New York City, we're prioritizing, as well as we're very eager and excited to be working with Points of Light to look at it on a national scale as well. So I think at this point, we're welcoming everybody back for the conversation.
We are. Thank you so much, both of you. One, for being here with us today, but just the notion how you all are grounding your work, and how similar some of the lessons are for me is really inspiring, and also like, oh, I get it. Because so much of what we talk about in our sector is that we need to build coalitions to then build infrastructure so we can get to impact. And then it's really amazing, Laura, to hear when you're talking about actually what the volunteers are saying is they want to build connections with each other, get together, and build impact. And so that same lesson for a volunteer is the same lesson we should have across how we actually build the infrastructure of the volunteer sector. So thank you for grounding us in those ideas. I'm going to pass it over to Dave from California Volunteers, working on a statewide initiative, and really with that lens, thinking about how your organization was really, chartered to think about the quality, scale, and sustainability of, a massive civic infrastructure across your state. How does this resonate with you? What's your thoughts from a statewide perspective of the success and the challenges you've had building that infrastructure?
Yeah, I have lots of ideas, but I'll sort of jump in here first by saying thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I mean, cross-sector leadership, especially at the intersection of service and volunteerism, is my jam. I've been doing this work for a number of years, formerly with the National Conference on Citizenship, actually collaborating with Points of Light on the Civic 50, which was itself kind of a great cross-sector partnership, and then at the Presidio Institute, which we actually did a lot of research and practice in this area around cross-sector collaboration, cross-sector leadership, and sort of universal skills of cross-sector partnerships that are required to ultimately facilitate cross-sector partnerships. I love the idea about embracing friction. Actually, what we ended up publishing an article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review that references sort of the key skills of cross-sector leadership and essential skills for cross-sector leaders, that talks about leveraging diversity as an asset rather than what divides us. It talks about leveraging influence rather than authority and how you actually work together. And I think, connecting to this broader point, rather than looking only for similarities, we talk about it's equally valuable to identify and articulate the differences, especially in motivations and perspectives, because that's what's going to allow for a collaborative effort to really create value and create value for all partners, so that individual partners have their own solution that they're ultimately trying to drive for. And there was even a second article that we published that was around community-centered selfishness, that actually looked at reimagining service, which was another collaboration that Points of Light has incubated, that looks at how do you bring together business, nonprofit, government, and solve problems at scale. So I just wanted to reference a couple of those resources, as they are older ideas, but recycling sort of in this new vein. In terms of California Volunteers, I mean, California Volunteers is part of the Office of the Governor, of Governor Newsom here in California. We are the state commission as it relates to the service program. And the California Volunteers Fund was actually created by the state legislature to sit alongside the Office of the Governor, to forge public-private partnerships, to build philanthropic partnerships, and to ultimately both be an innovation arm for new ideas and to help scale some of these ideas through partnership with government. And so I'll share a few of those ideas here. The government agency, of course, is part of the Office of the Governor. It's run by our Chief Service Officer, Josh Friday, and we have a tremendous infrastructure here in the state. We have over 10,000 service members, which actually makes us larger than the Peace Corps just here in California. Those service members leverage hundreds of thousands of volunteers. They serve at over 1,000 host partners, many of those in the nonprofit sector as well as governmental sector. And then we have over 100 business partners who collaborate with us on various initiatives. And so I'm excited to kind of share some of those insights. The one that I'll just sort of kick off here is around, we can talk more kind of looking back over the last 5 years, but most recently, certainly in responding to the LA fires, this was a place where in real time we were needing to forge partnerships to help meet some very specific needs. I noticed a number of the names in the chat of other partners that we've collaborated with. But in this case, what we were trying to do was leverage federal, state, and governmental partnerships. So certainly the FEMA disaster recovery centers themselves were just these fascinating places where you had 65 different organizations and companies and government agencies that were all sort of co-located to help meet some of the critical needs that people who were impacted by the fires had. We had our service members serving at places like the YMCAs and the food banks to help meet those critical needs, from food to childcare, to providing childcare at the time when then those who were impacted by the fires could actually go and start the process of rebuilding, or at least learning what they could rebuild. We also had a set of business partners from Starbucks to Kroger to Amazon meeting some immediate needs, be that, you know, food and caffeine needs, to meeting to leveraging a lot of their core competencies and skills-based volunteering. You know, one of the biggest challenges in a time where we had multiple fires happening in different places around the LA area, and we had an influx of volunteers and people willing to donate different things, was even just the logistics of moving things from one place to another. And Amazon actually stepped up and said, you know, this is actually, you know, logistics is our jam. Like, how do we actually leverage our fleets of vehicles and our volunteers to help be able to support some of those needs? And so we saw that happening in live time as well. And what we found were that, you know, the real key here in times of disaster is being able to have the partners on the ground who can identify real needs that people have, and then leverage the partnership network to share actionable invitations where people can then step in. People, organizations, nonprofits, businesses can step in and actually help meet those specific needs.
So as we think about all of these, I love, like, as we're everything's stacking, right? As we think about how individual people have to respond, whether it's in times of disaster or to a critical issue that's happening in their own community, there is the experience of those volunteers. There's the experience of the nonprofit partners, the business partners, the institutions of higher ed, and then the government agencies that are all webbing together. And that takes a lot of work to build trust. And to sustain trust, and how can that happen? And so I would love to hear from you all, you know, knowing kind of in the time that we're in, we've talked about, you know, constrained resources, polarization that exists in society, but also exists in our sector. Tell us a little snippet of a time that you have intentionally been able to build and maintain trust with communities and with each other while still trying to get to that impact. I think it's really easy to start in a place of trust, but what are some things that you've done to try to maintain and support it along the way?
I can start if that's okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
because it kind of links to what Dave was just sharing about, anyway, what do we do at a moment of crisis? So I was in Helsinki in the city's executive team when COVID hit, and we quarantined all people over 65. And it was, I mean, completely new situation that the city had never been in. And we realized that we need to find a way to check in with all our senior residents and see what their needs are. And it was really a moving moment. As a city, probably for the first time, we said, we can't do this alone. And like, there's this clear need. We don't quite know what we need to do, but we're happy to like throw basically all of our resources on tackling this, but we need help. And we partnered up with the Lutheran Church and other religious communities in the city, with logistics companies building what Dave was just sharing. And we basically built a model where we called every single 65-year-old in the city in a matter of weeks. And it was only possible through volunteer action, through, in a way, mobilizing city staff, the church's staff. And it was the first time we actually called people and asked if they need help. And the fact that the city had the trust and confidence and the data to contact people, the Lutheran Church was able to give religious support and mental health support. We had the postal service that was delivering food. We had car rental companies giving cars for our staff to drive food and medication to people. And it was just a really moving moment of how, as a local government, you can like show vulnerability in a time of crisis, and suddenly your phone starts ringing. And it was just an incredible moment. Going back to what Dave was saying, like building on difference, like we clearly had a shared goal, while we also said, this is something where the Red Cross is a lot better than the city. And this is an area that the city needs to handle. And in a way, data protection is something that the city needs to handle. Whereas, or money is something that the city needs to handle. But when it comes to dealing with medication, the Red Cross is so much more efficient than we are in doing it. Or like the postal service does like logistics a lot more efficiently than we do. Although our library people did really well with logistics because they're used to moving stuff from one place to another. That's like the example that I go back to time and time again.
Yeah, and I'd add in this too, because I think, similarly, New York City faced so many things in COVID-19. Then we also, over the last couple of years, have been working with just the influx of asylum seekers here in New York. That's been a huge piece. And I think one of the things that we really were able to do is obviously the city is able to identify, here's where what the needs are, here's what is what we're seeing. A lot of what we did in building that trust is bringing people together to have those conversations. So, and I think too, even in the best of times, nonprofits are always strapped for resources. There's never enough for what everybody wants. So it's looking at this broader kind of role in bringing sectors together. So we were able to do things. We have a businesses and service convening that we do. We try and do quarterly. We had a specific session where we brought in nonprofits who are on the ground working on asylum seekers and just trying to scramble and figure out to provide additional services to people coming in. And setting the tone too of these are new neighbors coming in. So what are people doing in order to set them up for success? How can businesses hear directly from them what maybe they're not hearing in the media about what it's like on the ground? And then also where are the actual genuine ways to plug in? Because I think a lot of what we were doing at the time was just setting expectations for businesses. Like when your employees come in to volunteer, it's not, people are in crisis. This is not going to be an easy, just an easy volunteer thing. It's not going to be as set up as it normally would for like an employee service day. So kind of helping to just put forth like what the realities are and helping that communication between groups as they were all trying to figure out, because everybody wanted to help. And then it's figuring out, how do we do this? So I think it's just so much of it is how do you just look to foster genuine partnerships? And also a lot of what we do is, we have things similarly around mentoring for especially young women, and a lot of other things here in the city, that it's looking at longer term partnerships, getting, businesses, nonprofits, and everybody to think about, this is really like, yes, this is a crisis now, but how do we set up these longer term partnerships so that you have the relationships for when things happen and can come and mobilize together. And then I also think it's this idea of funding or looking at capacity in multiple ways and supports in multiple ways. So yes, funding, everybody always needs funding, but it's also the capacity of adding in people to help with certain things that the city set up for asylum seekers. They actually set up a clinic, and people from law firms came in to actually volunteer and help people get their paperwork together. So there's so many ways to bring all of this together, and it's looking at, it may be funding, it may be capacity, it may be in-kind donations. So really those are those relationships that you can build and kind of build that trust in the long term.
Now I'll build on this with a story that's also about COVID, and kind of the origin of one of our programs called Californians for All. And I'll just briefly kind of how it came to be was, we, as everyone remembers at that time, we were all sort of back in our homes. What we saw was a dramatic decline in volunteers who could serve at food banks, and a dramatic increase in terms of demand from our food banks. And so I got a call from Josh Friday, our Chief Service Officer, saying, do you have some ideas around how we might leverage volunteers to help meet this need? And so I wrote up a memo and said, here's what I think, based off of some ideas of being in this field. Delivered it on Friday. I got a call on Saturday saying the governor loved it, and that he was going to announce it on Tuesday, and I had to start Monday to help stand it up. And I was like, yeah, this sounds great. This sounds exactly like what we have been prepared to do. My first call on Sunday, even the day before I started, was to Greg Baldwin, who ran Volunteer Match at the time. And we were actually echoing back to some conversations that we had had during reimagining service conversations, years earlier, where we had talked about how we might leverage technology to meet some of these key needs and how we might leverage some of these platforms. And what we were able to do was initially that the focus was we had to meet the need. And so the state actually called in the National Guard to stand up our food banks across the state of California. It was a very expensive but necessary and critical part of our infrastructure. We then started leveraging service members alongside, so AmeriCorps disaster team members, as well as other AmeriCorps members that could help support that work. And then we were quickly trying to move into how we could then leverage volunteers. And so, again, using this kind of suite of the tools at our disposal, we were able to get some vistas to then be embedded in each food bank across the state of California, who could be their volunteer manager. And then we could call on Californians to then volunteer. And we saw within 24 hours, over 25,000 Californians step up and say, I want to be part of the solution. And then it was a question of matchmaking and then actually facilitating them to show up. So what that then required was, well, there's great infrastructure that's already out there. So there's the hands-on Bay Area, Sacramento, San Diego, LA Works, 10C, United Ways, Team Rubicon, all of our VOAD network. Some of that was pre-existing trust and relationships. Some of it, we had to rebuild some trust and relationships within that time. And so it was a matter of really making sure that we put the mission at the center. We get all of our partners and resources around the side and say, how can we help solve this? And then to some of the points that Tommi was making earlier, we had to realize that different people had different motivations. They had different positioning that they needed in their community, that they needed, to be the ones who owned the relationships with the local businesses, or they needed to be the ones who were collaborating with local philanthropy. And so there was an element of how do you push the initiative forward while ensuring that everyone who was part of it had their needs met. Same thing with business partners. Some of them really had questions around the safety. And so we had to make sure that we could guarantee the safety in the same way that we were with our service members to ensure that people were serving in a safe environment. And this was early on, before we even had a lot of the guidance that was coming out of the federal government. And so this was a place where we had to leverage a lot of different cross-sector partnerships. What I will say is, the ideas that came up around this had cycled. These were some ideas that we had leveraged, years earlier, and have leveraged since. But it was really the relationships that were the through line. It was the people that you could call on a Sunday, that you could text before, the start of the workday, that you could leverage and say, hey, you know what? We don't really know 100% of what we're doing. Like there's going to be lessons learned in this process. We may fail a few times, but if you're willing to kind of go through this with us and help us learn together, we're going to be able to accomplish something pretty significant. And that network, Operation Feed California, served over 10 billion meals over the course of that first year of COVID.
Oh, that in itself is just amazing. But I like to call what you were talking about earlier, we sunrise things, right? Sometimes we sunset programs when it's right, and then we sunrise things when it's time. And often it is based on knowing what's happening in your community and being able to respond to the now. A lot of the examples that we've given so far were very time bound because there was like an external force coming at us, whether it was COVID or fires or, crisis happening within our community, that forced us to collaborate. And sometimes when you're in with someone in kind of an emergency situation, that's how you build trust. But I want to get back to this idea of like the known friction of different priorities. And I can't remember, and I want you to bring up that term you used again, Dave, when it's your turn to chat around the selfishness of like your own priorities. Because I think it's really interesting to acknowledge the fact that when we are in partnership, we do have different perspectives. We have different models of delivery. We have, and we might have different outcomes that we are anticipating, but they can be mutually beneficial. They don't have to all be the same and line up. And I think just listening to you all and hearing about all the different cross-sector relationships and this idea of really bringing all these perspectives together, sometimes those priorities don't align, or the values don't align, or the intent doesn't, but you're able to build a really healthy relationship, even if. And so I would just love to hear from you about how you were able to do that, or some tactical examples of tools or techniques or resources that you use to really think about bringing all of these disparate ideations together towards a real good common goal for your communities.
I mean, in the research I did, like one of the case studies is on Charlotte, North Carolina, and I think Charlotte is very skilled in coming together around like a bigger issue. I think the good example of that is Rush Chetty published this research in 2013, if I remember correctly, on economic mobility in the 50 biggest metropolitan areas in the US, and Charlotte was 50 out of 50. So the lowest economic mobility in a fairly wealthy city. And I think in that case, it's really remarkable what's happened in that community, where the community foundation stepped in and said, we need to understand together why this is happening. And probably the business community, nonprofits, local authorities have very different ideas on like what the levers of change here are. Like how should we actually, why does this happen, and what could we do? And the community foundation there was really skilled in bringing this community together, being kind of the broker between the different agendas. They had sufficient trust with everyone, and they brought in like external, like Nobel-winning poverty researchers, in a way, helping the community understand, in a way, before actually taking action, and making sure that everyone around the table committed to convening and also validating the differences in experiences and priorities. And they were able to come up with an agenda that's actually moving the needle in Charlotte, which I think is really remarkable. And I've done quite a lot of work with Charlotte, and I think they have really some like, for instance, the philanthropy in Charlotte is really skilled in coming together and pooling resources when you've done the sense-making part of why is everyone around the table? We're not all here for the same reason, but there's enough alignment for us to do practical good work together.
So before anyone hops in, I just want to ask, because I've studied a lot of the stuff that Raj Chetty has done in Charlotte, and we were doing some things like that here in Richmond. I want to just make sure I hear what you're saying. As a tactical tool to get people from multiple places together, it's understanding what back to data and research. What is the real situation? Making sense of it is, I think, what you just termed it. Making sense of what's the real question. And if you have an aligned vision, you can shift through the different tactics to get there.
Yes,
I'm going to make sure I'm kind of recapping that, because I think that's a really great perspective on it. Yeah.
But the data and research alone doesn't change people's minds. So
no,
you have to do
I like the way you phrase that.
You have to do the convening part, which is, I think, where you have to find a broker that has enough trust with all the partners so that they can actually like help organizations understand each other and understand that it's not about choosing your priorities over mine. It's for us to understand why we are at this table and what's the practical area of collaboration.
Like a broker of trust and a broker of kind of data knowledge and where you're heading.
Exactly.
Laura.
Yeah, I think the thing that's coming to mind for me, for many years now, we've run a large youth leadership council network here in the city. So we have, in any given year, 50 to 75 YLCs that kind of come together and we build this network out. And we've done a lot of work over the years with NYPD and their community officer, or the community affairs officers, their youth officers. And I think very early on, I remember sitting down and I was like, oh, we can, think about this program in the way of like building relationships between youth and officers and it was a long time inspector who's since retired. And he's like, no, he's like, you don't need to force people into the relationships. What you need to do is find what is the thing that everybody has in common in the community, around the precinct, the students who are going to the school there, and see the things that are going on in their community when they walk back and forth to school. And that's the thing that's going to unite them. And I think fast forward now, many, many years later, we have this phenomenal Youth Leadership Council. It's the Adams Street Youth Leadership Council there. It's I believe, an all-girls school in Brooklyn, and many of their students are coming from outside of that area of Brooklyn to go to school. I won't even get into, how everybody goes to school here, because it's very different from where many of us have grown up and went to school. But they're coming from, all over the city to go to this high school. And that they were like, the police just really see us as we're transient kids, we're coming in and out, we're the problems, and that we're actually here and want to do something for this community we spend the majority of our time in. So that they've actually built out an entire program, and I think they're now 3 years into it, where they actually come together with the officers to do kind of like community building activities. They do a huge field day every year, which is one of my favorite events to go to. But the process of leading up to that is so many meetings with the local precinct. It's having really robust conversations about, this is how we see you, having very direct conversations about, like, here's how we feel like we're treated, and opening up that dialogue with the community affairs officers, with the youth officers. And it's just something that has strengthened every year, and you've really been able to see kind of this change. And then when you look at the youth themselves do surveys of the students, of the officers, and just the perceptions that the students are able to see differently and feel like they have more of a voice in the community and with the local police precinct, have been these huge, huge things. So I think it's really, and I think that's one example, but of so many, of just being really hyper focused on, this is the thing that we all care about. And the term I always think about is productive disequilibrium, of like, change occurs at a rate that people can kind of, how do you create change at a rate that people can handle? Because they can't go to this idea, they can't make this huge leap quickly. But if you're kind of pushing them and prodding them and getting them to think about these things, that it takes time, it takes trust, it takes these, all these things that Tommi is talking about, of it's that kind of necessary friction that you have there that's really helping you get at the depth of the ideas, so that people are truly invested when you arrive at that point where everything is starting to make sense together.
I love that Laura just tossed in the productive zone of disequilibrium.
I did not make it up. You can Google it. There's lots of stuff out there.
Yeah, the works. So adaptive leadership and the work that's been done by Heifetz out of Harvard, I think is really relevant to cross-sector leadership, and I think the way that I absolutely agree with that. I would also say, and to your question, Vanessa, around the article that we ended up writing with independent sector was called Community-Centered Selfishness. And it was around this idea of, how do you set up a collaboration so that it's not, like, one of the challenges with collaboration is sometimes it becomes the lowest common denominator. What's the least possible thing we can all agree on, versus like, what's the highest potential solution? Which is, what does it look like if you actually, everyone is getting what they want out of the solution? And they may not get everything they want, but there can be an aspiration to say, how do we actually make sure that if we design this solution well, everyone has something that they're getting that also doesn't require a duplication of effort. So the article talks about, like, how people can feel the collaboration is successful, and they want to be involved and feel that their involvement's actually making a difference, that they have a role to play in moving the collaboration forward. From a product's perspective, it's around, how does a collaboration not necessarily mean additional new work? I think that's a big thing in the idea of limited time and resources, which is, how can this be part of your day job, and collaborations are not like the add-on or the additional thing that you need to be part of. From a purpose perspective, it's around collaborations providing a unique, neutral space for competitors to actually collaborate. We talk about this as collaborators from different sectors. So certainly business collaborators are one of them, nonprofit collaborators who often are collaborating or who may be competing over similar resources. We see this in the academic field a lot, where you can actually collaborate with people in different departments and different in ways that they can actually come into a partnership and do things that they wouldn't normally be able to do by having this sort of third party or this collaboration play a role in helping to support them through partnership. And then finally, it really is around, like, making sure that there's a disposition towards action, and that there's a community-centered, selfish approach that allows people to achieve results. Now, this all requires a transparency and motivation. And so it does require a level of trust and forthrightness where people can say, this is what I actually need out of this. That's difficult to do first time out. So sometimes it requires multiple, relationship building over time so that then you can have that candid level, the ability to say, no, I'm going to need this to actually be part of it. But if I get that, I can bring 3x what I brought last time.
There's so many pieces of this that I wish we could weave together. This was an amazing session. I just want to thank you all for your time and your work. The thing I'm walking away with all of this is that trust, collaboration, bringing lots of different voices to the table, creating that transparency. It isn't easy. It isn't quick. It's long term, and to sustain and maintain it, you have to keep at it, and you have to keep valuing all the people that are at the table or bringing more people in to create these cross-sector collaborations. I'm a firm believer, as I think most people are on this call, that it takes a little bit of all of us, of every one of these sectors, to make the change that we want to see in the world. And we've got to, our jobs often is in our communities is to weave that together. We are sometimes the architects of that civic infrastructure. And I think the lessons you all gave us here are really honing in on the work it takes to nurture relationships so you can really get to collaboration. So thank you all so much for your time today. I hope everyone learned something or got a little nugget of information or inspiration. There's a lot of great resources to the side in the chat. We will also be sending out some accumulation kind of resources out for you all. We do hope that you are joining us in I think it's coming out. Okay. I think we hope that you are joining us in New Orleans. Laura is going to have an amazing session really talking about cross-sector partnerships and the work that they're doing in New York City. Please go to our website if you are interested in joining us for a conference, and we hope to see you all soon. Thanks so much.